right, put my cards down just in case I forget. All right, so I'm going to start off today with a confession. It has been the most trying journey to get up here and figure out how to talk to you people. And that's for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that I have anxiety. It's technically called a generalized anxiety disorder, which is a really fancy way of saying I worry about everything. I worry about, today I was worried that I might have forgotten to shave one of my legs, so I had to wear tights. The thing about anxiety is that it makes me feel not very hopeful. I feel hopeless a lot, and that's for a couple of different reasons. The first reason is I sometimes wonder if I'm ever going to be normal again. The second reason is after I've had a panic attack. That's the scariest thing. I have no control over what I do, my breathing. It's horrifying. Or I've had somebody say to me, well, if you didn't worry so much, you wouldn't have anxiety. That works really well. It gives me something else to worry about. Now, when my anxiety finally realized that I was going to be talking to about 100 people today, it started to scream at me. It was like, oh, you stupid, stupid idiot. What have you done? You can't do this. Because all of the people you're speaking with, they have amazing experiences, and they're really cool, and you like to spill on yourself, so you might spill on your dress in the morning. The second part of why this was so hard for me to come up here today is I didn't know if I could accurately explain how you can find hope when you're hopeless. Like, what does that even mean? You have hope and hopelessness, which are two words on complete opposite ends of the spectrum. Hope, on the one hand, seems to bring up these ideas of, things are going well, we're cheerful, we're happy. I was hopeful last night when I ate an entire Big Mac and thought I was hopeful by thinking I could still fit into my dress this morning. Now, hopelessness, we tend to associate with the negative. We associate it with depression, things aren't going well, very gray, monotone life. So what I had to do is I had to take a step back, and I had to look at my own life. And what I found is that in my own hopelessness, some of my biggest personal growth happened. I had these little pockets of happiness and hope in times where things weren't going very well. And I may have been reading Harry Potter at the time, so I called these my Phoenix moments. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the story of the Phoenix, let me explain. You see, the Phoenix is this mythological fiery bird, and it lives to be about 100 years old. Now, when the Phoenix nears the end of its life, it goes into a tree and it makes a nest. And then it lights itself and the whole tree on fire, and it kills itself. Now, the interesting thing about the Phoenix is that when all of that chaos has settled and the fire has subsided, a little fledgling phoenix emerges from the ashes, renewed and reborn. And I thought, this was the most lovely metaphor I'd ever heard. That phoenix literally crumbles away to nothing for it to become better. And then I realized, hope can be born out of hopelessness. Hope can be born out of tragedy. And my whole speech started to take off. I'm going to share some of my personal story with you guys today. And I hope you get something out of it. But if you don't, that's okay too. And I want to thank you for listening. So the first time I ever felt truly hopeless, I was 8 years old. This is also the first time that somebody told me I was ugly. That word, like fire, came out of that person's mouth and hit me right in the chest. It branded me. That word ran over my body, and it made me feel shameful and disgusting and sad. I tried to pretend like it didn't bother me, but it did. Now, that kind of became like my thing. I became the ugly girl. And I was called ugly every day for the next 5 years of my life. And I started to internalize what was said to me. I thought if I was ugly, no one would ever love me, that I was useless and I was a waste. The thing is, and looking back on this with adult eyes, I don't think that those kids knew the impact that their words had on me. I don't think that they realized that by the time I was 13, from hearing I was ugly so much, that I would have set the tone that I would have well into my adult years. Later on, professionals that I had to work with would call this low self-esteem, negative self-talk, and poor body image. I also don't think that they realized that hearing this so much kind of helped me enter into a very deep, full-blown depression, created some suicidal thoughts, and I started engaging in self-harm at 13. I prayed to God every single night that he would make me beautiful, and that if he made me beautiful, maybe I would fit in. Because, big surprise, I was also really weird too. So, if you see any pictures of me from like age 6 to, well, still now, like, who am I kidding? Now, that was really isolating, and it made it hard for me and my peers to relate. And that's not their fault, that's just who I was. I will give these kids one thing. They were very creative with some of the names that they came up for me. I have very, very curly hair, like even curlier than it is now. And somebody told me one time that my hair looked like a fart that someone had lit on fire and put on top of my head. Somebody else had told me I looked like a drowned rat, and those times were really hard. And I believed what was being said to me. And I couldn't tell anyone, because if I did, I was so scared that they would just agree. They would say, well, Courtney, you are hideous. Do you expect them not to point that out? Things got so bad that eventually the people closest to me, like my parents, and this very amazing teacher I had, started to take notice. So they suggested that I go into some counseling. And it was around this time that I started to dream. I dreamed of a life where I would move out of the city, and I would go to university, and I would travel, and I would become the most interesting person in the whole wide world. Apparently, 13-year-old me just wanted to come back and brag. But the point is, those dreams kept me alive. What I was doing, and I didn't realize it at the time, is I started shaping my future. I knew I couldn't control what was going on now, but I could definitely make my future better. And I did those things. I traveled, and I went to university, and I made new friends, and my life was going so well. And then my dad got sick. I can remember April 18th, 2011, vividly. I woke up like any typical 19-year-old, well into the afternoon. What wasn't so typical about the way I woke up is that I woke up to the sounds of footsteps in the kitchen, because my parents had banished me to the basement because I was unpleasant. And so, I can hear her laughing, it's true. She'll deny it, but it's true. What was kind of untypical about the way I woke up is that I woke up to the sounds of footsteps in the kitchen. And these footsteps would go down the stairs, and then they would kind of clomp, kind of like this, back up the stairs, and then down again, and back up, and down again, and then silence. Now, I have a really large, loud family, and if any of you have a large, loud family, you know that silence means one thing. Somebody is going to punch you, or somebody is going to scare you. It just doesn't mean anything good. I was freaked right out. So what I did is I kind of like stumbled out of bed, and I opened the door, and I kind of like shuffled down the hallway, and I peeked around the corner of our basement, because I was banished to the basement, don't forget that. And there he was. There was my dad. Now, my dad was dressed in his full winter gear. He had on a hat, on a coat, and he had on his winter boots. And the TV was on, and there was basketball highlights playing, but the sound had been muted. And where he was seated was right next to our fireplace, and the fireplace was on. Now, I showed restraint for the first time in my whole life, because I usually say just what I think. I didn't tell him how weird he was being. Because for the last few months, my life had been anything but normal. You see, my dad in the fall had been diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety. And from that point, he went from somebody that went for drives with me, was loud, funny, and taught me a lot about how society works and why we treat people the way we do, to a person I didn't even recognize. So instead of telling him he was being weird, what I did is we made some small talk. I asked him, "What are you doing for the day?" And he's like, "I don't know." And I then said, "Well, Dad, I think you should do something." And he said, "Yeah." And then I said, "Okay, well, I'm going upstairs." And I got ready for the day. While I was in the shower, I heard our front door slam shut. And I thought this was strange because he never went anywhere without telling us at that point. And I kind of just called out, "Okay, bye, Dad." But I was met with silence. That was the last time I ever saw my dad alive. At about 7 o'clock that evening, we reported him missing to the police. And at about 1 a.m. the next morning, the RCMP officer came to our house and said these words: "He shot himself." Never in my life have I experienced a heartbreak like that. I fell to the floor, screaming, crying, and swearing. I think that was the only time my mom ever let me say the F word, by the way. And I literally felt my heart being ripped out of my chest. Now, the unfortunate thing about tragedy is that life moves on, even when you don't want it to. So we had the funeral, we had lots of family come into town, and we had to start to find our new normal. So my mom thought new normal meant I should go to counseling. I did not agree. I thought that was the stupidest idea she ever could have put out there. I didn't want to go because what was the counselor going to say? My dad was already dead. I had all of this crap from when I was a kid. And was he going to blame me for my dad passing away? I didn't know. But it got me out of the house, so I agreed to go. I said 2 words to the counselor during our appointment and spent the rest of the time crying. But crying felt better than not doing anything, so I made another appointment, and another, and another. And eventually I was able to stop crying and, release my feelings a little bit more. And this was about the time that I decided I wanted to be a social worker, because I wanted to work with families who had gone through something like I had. And so I applied to the university to get into the social work program, and I was so excited because I had all these great experiences, and I wrote like a 200-page application that I sent to Leanne, and Leanne had to read through. And you know what? They rejected me. They said I could not be in the program, and I was devastated. Okay, so let's recap. I went through a bunch of awful things as a kid where I was bullied, so I had low self-esteem. My dad is dead, and now you are telling me, university, that I cannot have a job. Thanks a lot, you don't know what you're missing out on. But I kind of had two choices, and I thought, okay, I can do nothing, or I can see what happens next. So I took the next year to find myself. And finding myself led me into working at a summer camp for people with disabilities. And that experience changed my life. I wanted to work with people with disabilities, and I'm so proud to say that that experience led me to getting my degree in social work. It led me on a trip to Peru, where I worked in an orphanage for children with special needs, and it gave me my life's purpose. I want to leave you guys with one thing before I wrap up, because I've been talking for a long time. Finding hope when you don't feel like going on is probably one of the hardest things that you'll ever go through. And it's okay in those moments to not be happy. Okay, we always seem to have these ideas that if you try hard enough, you will be happy. It's a lot like if you stop worrying, you won't have anxiety. They don't work. So take those moments. Take those moments to be sad and feel sorry for yourself and to be miserable. Or you know what? If you don't feel like fighting that day, that's okay too. Lie in bed and watch Netflix. I did. Sometimes, just knowing that we can put the fight off for a day gives us enough hope to start a new day. Now, like that phoenix, I literally crumbled away to nothing. But I came out each time renewed and reborn. I'm Courtney Bell, and I am a phoenix. But you know what? So are each and every one of you. Thank you for listening.